Wyoming Territory, September 1879. The sun had just dipped low behind the hills when Trenton McAllister caught sight of something strange near the edge of his barn movement, where there should not have been any. He had just finished watering the horses when he saw the shift of a shadow, too soft and small to be a coyote. He stepped quietly toward the back of the barn, boots crunching lightly over the dry grass, hand resting near the butt of his rifle out of habit, not fear. That was when he saw her. A young woman crouched low in the dirt, pressed up against the barn wall like she could disappear into it. Her dress was torn at the hem, streaked with dust and dried blood. Her arms were wrapped around a bundle of baby, maybe 6 months old, red-cheeked and fussing quietly against her chest. She looked up at him slowly, eyes wide and guarded, chin lifting with a kind of tired defiance. "We're fine," she said, voice rasped from the dry air. "We don't want trouble." Trenton took in the cracked lips, the way her fingers trembled even as she tried to shield the child. He said softly, "You're not alone." She blinked, and her eyes filled with tears that did not fall. He crouched down slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "Name's Trenton McAllister. This is my land. You're safe here." She did not look convinced. "What's your name?" he asked. "Brielle," she whispered. "Brielle Danton, and this is my son Nolan." The baby let out a weak cry, and she rocked him gently. Trenton looked over her shoulder toward the tree line. "You running from someone?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "My husband died last winter back in Kansas." "His brother? He tried to take the baby, said I owed him for the debts. We ran, been walking for 6 days. He reached for his canteen and held it out. You walked with a baby for 6 days. Her hands shook as she took the canteen. "We didn't have a choice." Trenton stood and offered her his hand. "You still don't, but you do have help now." She looked at his hand for a long moment before finally taking it. Her fingers were cold, her palm rough with grit. He helped her stand. She swayed a little, and he steadied her with one hand on her back. "I have a spare bedroom inside," he said. "You and Nolan can stay there. I will not ask questions you don't want to answer." "Why would you help us?" she asked, still wary. He looked at her steady. "Because you need it." He led her inside the house, a simple 2-room structure with a wide front porch and a warm stove already burning low. She sat on the edge of the bed while Trenton fetched clean water and a pan for washing. She cleaned Nolan first, then herself, hands clumsy with exhaustion. He left her a clean wool blanket and closed the door behind him, letting her rest. That night, Trenton sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the stars blink into the sky. He could not stop thinking about the look in her eyes, worn down but not broken. She had fire left in her, even if it was buried under miles of fear and dust. Inside, behind that door, was a woman who had risked everything to protect her child, and now she was here, on his land, under his roof. Brielle woke to the smell of bread baking and something softer peace, the kind of peace that came with silence, not weighted by fear. Nolan was still asleep against her chest, his small hand curled into the fabric of her borrowed nightdress. She stepped into the kitchen around midday, her hair braided back, face freshly washed. Trenton looked up from the stove where he was frying salt pork. He nodded once. "Coffee's hot." "There's bread and honey if you want." "Thank you," she said quietly. He poured her a tin cup and set it in front of her. She took it with both hands, eyes studying him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and dark blonde hair that brushed his collar. Not young, but not old, maybe 30. Hands rough with work, voice calm. She could not read him yet, but he felt steady. "You do this often?" she asked. "Taken strangers," he shook his head. "Just you?" She looked away, unsure what to say to that. Nolan stirred in her arms, and she bounced him gently. "I can work," she said after a moment. "Help out around here. I do not expect charity." Trenton leaned against the counter. "This is a cattle ranch. There is always work." "But I want you to rest first." "I do not need rest," he said again, firm but not unkind. "When you are ready, we will talk about chores." She met his eyes, and for the first time in days, she felt something shift in her chest. Not quite safety, not yet, but the edges of it. The days passed slowly. Trenton did not ask questions. He gave her space. But he was always nearby, fixing a fence, shoeing one of the horses, chopping firewood. He brought her meals without asking. Left little things an extra shawl, a wooden rattle for Nalan, a book of scripture with pages worn soft. One morning, Brielle stepped outside with Nalan bundled in her arms. Trenton was hauling a saddle onto one of the horses. "Teach me," she said. He looked up. "To ride," she nodded. He hesitated. "You sure?" "I do not want to be helpless anymore," so he taught her. In the wide field behind the barn, with Nalan watching from a blanket in the grass, he helped her into the saddle. She was stiff at first, unsure, but he was patient, held the reins with her. Walked beside her until she found her balance. "You are brave," he said once, quiet. She looked at him. "No, I am just tired of running." He gave a small smile, soft, not mocking. "Same thing some days." That night she cooked dinner. It was simple beans, cornbread, and salted meat, but when he sat down at the table and took the first bite, he said, "Tastes like home." She blinked down at her plate. "I forgot what that felt like." He did not say anything, just reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. 1 week turned into 2. Nalan started to laugh more, sleep more. His cheeks filled out. Brielle walked taller. Her bruises faded. Her eyes stopped darting toward the door every time the wind changed, and Trenton, he started to smile more too. One evening, after dinner, she found him sitting on the porch with Nalan asleep in his arms. He was humming something low and tuneless, rocking the baby gently. She stood in the doorway, heart twisting. "You are good with him," she said. He looked up, surprised. "He is easy to love." Her eyes met his. "So are you." The words hung there, more truth than she meant to say. Trenton stood, careful not to wake Nalan. He walked to her, stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You do not have to say things to make me stay," she whispered. "I am not trying to make you stay," he said. "I am hoping you want to." Her breath caught. He leaned in, just enough for his forehead to touch hers. "You are not alone anymore, Brielle." She closed her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "The first frost came overnight." Brielle stood in the yard early, watching the white dust cling to fence rails and the brittle tops of grass. Nalan was wrapped snug against her chest in the sling she'd sewn from a flour sack and an old shirt Trenton had given her. He stirred but didn't wake. Trenton came out of the barn with a bucket in one hand and smoke rising from his breath. His sleeves were rolled, arms marked by the cold and work. "You'll want to bring the laundry in before it stiffens," he said, nodding toward the line where her washing still hung, now rimmed with ice. She crossed the yard and began unpinning the garments one by one. He reached up beside her and wordlessly took down the heavier pieces, folding them carefully into the basket. When the last of the clothes were gathered, she glanced over at him. "You planning to winter alone out here?" He set a shirt on the pile. "Was the plan." And now he looked at her, then down at Nalan. Thinking plans change. They walked back toward the house, the cold quiet between them not uncomfortable. Inside, she laid the clothes by the stove and added a split log to the fire. Later that morning, Brielle stood on the porch while Nalan napped in the cradle Trenton had built from pine boards and an old wagon yoke. She was mending a tear in one of the saddle blankets when she heard hoofbeats coming up the trail. A single rider, a woman in a navy wool coat and a wide hat, eased her horse to a stop near the gate. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with a straight back and a face that looked like it had spent decades riding against the wind. Brielle stepped down off the porch, folding her hands. "Can I help you?" The woman dismounted and gave a polite nod. "You must be the girl staying with McAllister." "I'm Claire Heller. I own the feed store in town." Brielle's fingers tensed over her apron. "Yes, ma'am. I brought him some barley and salt blocks he ordered. Thought I'd see if he's around. He's mending the south fence." Claire's sharp eyes softened a touch. "You look like you've had a hard ride yourself." "I'm managing." Claire studied her a moment longer, then nodded once. "If you need anything, you come to the store. I don't ask questions I wouldn't answer myself." Brielle gave a grateful nod. "Thank you." Claire mounted up again, her gaze lingering briefly on the house before she turned her horse and rode off. That evening, Trenton came in with fresh bruises on his knuckles and a rip in his shirt sleeve. "Fence post gave me trouble," he said, setting the hammer down. She didn't ask. Instead, she fetched the tin of salve from the shelf and took his hand without waiting for permission. His skin was warm, calloused. He didn't flinch when she spread the ointment across the scraped skin. You should have let me help with the fence, she said, tying the cloth bandage carefully. You've got Nalan, he sleeps. Trenton looked at her, something unspoken behind his eyes. You want more to do? I want to earn my stay. You've already earned it, she shook her head. Not like that, he didn't press her, just reached for her other hand, still holding the tin. His thumb brushed over her fingers. You don't owe me anything, Brielle, she didn't pull away. Maybe not, but I want to be part of this place. I don't want to feel like I'm only passing through. He let go of her hand gently. Then you won't. The next day, Trenton brought in the last of the squash from the garden. Brielle chopped and boiled them for supper, adding dried sage from the bundle she'd tied above the stove. She hummed while she worked, something soft and wordless. Trenton watched her from the table, his face unreadable. You sing when you cook, he said after a while. She looked over her shoulder. I used to sing to Nalan, helps keep him calm. I suppose the habit stayed. I like it. She stirred the pot once more. Do you ever go into town? Only when I have to. Because of people, he nodded. Some folks remember my father. He wasn't a man worth remembering. She set the spoon down slowly. You don't seem like him. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I've known cruel men, she went on. You're not one of them. He looked at her, something in his expression shifting. Thank you. That night, after Nalan was put to bed, they sat by the fire without speaking. The silence wasn't heavy, just full. When she stood to fetch wood, Trenton rose with her. At the hearth, their arms brushed as they reached for the same log. She looked up at him. He didn't move away. I never thought I'd find a place where I could breathe again, she said quietly. He met her gaze. You think you have, I'm starting to. He reached out slowly and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. She didn't step back. Then stay, he said. I want to. He didn't kiss her, not yet. But his hand lingered at her cheek, and when she leaned into it, he let it stay. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't have to. The wind shifted in early November, pulling down the last of the golden cottonwood leaves and sending them scattering across the yard like brittle paper. The days shortened, the light coming in slant and cool through the windows, and the ground began to harden underfoot. Brielle started lighting the stove before dawn, moving quietly to let Nalan sleep longer, her steps sure across the boards now, like she belonged to them. She was sewing new sleeves onto one of Trenton's work shirts when he stepped in, cheeks ruddy from the cold and a bundle under one arm. I picked this up from Mrs. Heller, he said, setting the bundle on the table. She said it had been hanging on her back wall since last spring. Brielle unfolded the fabric carefully, a small wool coat, deep green with wooden buttons and a stitched lining. Her thumb passed over the seams. For Nalan, she said it was her grandson's. He outgrew it before winter last. Brielle laid the coat across her lap, quiet. You don't have to keep every kindness quiet, Trenton said, voice low. I don't know how not to. You could start with thank you. She looked up at him. Thank you, he nodded. There's more. He opened the top drawer of the cabinet and took out a folded paper. He handed it to her, and she read slowly, lips moving over the printed words. It's a land petition, she said after a moment. Your name's on it. I filed for the quarter section east of the pasture. Figured you might want your own name on something, too. Her hands tightened around the paper. Why would you do that? Trenton met her gaze. Because I want you to have something no one can take from you. Brielle sat very still. Then, slowly, she folded the petition and laid it on the table, smoothing it flat with her palm. You said once you didn't want to make me stay, she said. I still don't. But you're giving me land, I'm giving you choice. She stood, walked to the stove, and poured hot water into a tin basin. Her back stayed to him as she said, in Kansas, I never had that, not once. You do now. She turned, drying her hands on a cloth. You'd let me build on it, raise Nalan there. I'd hope you wouldn't have to do it alone, the cloth stilled in her hands. You'd stay. I'd marry you. She didn't answer right away, just looked at him, eyes unreadable. I'm not asking now, he added. Just telling you what I'd want if you wanted it too. Brielle walked over to the cradle where Nalan had begun to stir. She lifted him gently, rocking him against her shoulder. The wool coat lay folded on the table, the land petition beneath it. I'd want it to be real, she said softly. Not just kindness. I've never done anything out of pity in my life, She shifted Nolan to her hip. Then you'll wait till I ask you? Trenton gave a quiet laugh. I can do that. That night, Brielle laid the wool coat across the edge of the cradle. She sat beside it, watching Nolan sleep, his breath slow and steady. When she reached out to tuck a curl behind his ear, her hand didn't shake. Outside, Trenton hammered boards across the lower barn wall, patching a gap before the snow came. She watched him through the window, the way he moved with unthinking steadiness, like he'd known this land all his life. She thought of the petition, the coat, the quiet way he waited for her to decide. In the morning, she filled the kettle and set it to boil. Then she stepped into the yard, coat drawn tight, and walked to the barn. You said you'd marry me, she said, voice even. Trenton straightened from the beam he was checking. I did. Well, she said, I'm asking. He didn't smile. He just stepped down off the ladder, crossed the packed dirt between them, and took her face in both hands. No one will ever take anything from you again. She nodded once, then leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't hurried or soft. It was steady, like the ground under them, like the wind through the cottonwoods. Like the promise of spring after a long, dark freeze. She didn't let go first. And neither did he. The wedding happened just after the first snowfall, under a cold sky the color of pewter. It was quiet, just the preacher from the Copper Ridge Circuit and Claire Heller standing witness with Nolan bundled tight against her chest. Trenton wore his cleanest shirt, collar slightly askew from where Brielle had mended it with blue thread. She wore a dress Claire had let out for her, sage green wool with a single row of buttons down the front. Her hands didn't tremble when she took Trenton's. After the vows, Claire pressed a folded square of muslin into Brielle's palm. You'll need this more than something borrowed, she said, her voice dry as scrub grass. It's a list of midwives, for when the next one comes. Brielle blinked, then looked down at Nolan, who was gnawing on the corner of her shawl. Claire's eyes crinkled. You've got that look. Same one I had when I knew. Trenton didn't say anything, but his hand tightened around Brielle's. That night they shared the bed with the window cracked just enough to hear the wind move across the hills. She lay with her back to him at first, Nolan asleep in his cradle by the hearth. Trenton's arm circled gently around her waist, his breath slow and even against her shoulder. You're warm, he said. I've been cold for so long, it feels like I shouldn't trust it. I'll keep the fire going, you already have. She turned her face slightly toward him. I didn't expect this. Not this kind of living? I didn't either, he said. I just kept the place standing, didn't realize I was waiting for someone to fill it. Brielle closed her eyes, her hand finding his where it rested against her belly. Winter settled hard that year. The snow came in gusts, then stayed, crusting the roof in thick layers and icing the pump handle most mornings. Brielle learned the rhythm of it, how to stretch flour with cornmeal, how to boil water before dawn without waking the baby, how to press dried apple slices between cloth to soften them for pies. Trenton taught her how to clean his rifle, how to read the sky for weather, how to listen for the creak of weight on snow when coyotes wandered too close to the barn. You've got a steady hand, he said one morning as she cleaned the chamber with a scrap of muslin. Most folks flinch the first time. I flinched enough in Kansas, she said, not looking up. He stepped closer and set a small leather pouch beside her. Carved these for you, fit your grip better. She opened it, 3 cartridge handles, smoothed and shaped by hand. She ran her thumb over the grain, then looked up at him. I didn't ask for these. You shouldn't have to. February brought a storm that knocked the chimney stack loose and buried the front gate under 3 feet of drift. Trenton spent 2 days up on the roof, hammering through sleet, while Brielle kept the hearth burning and Nolan dry. On the 3rd day, the wind eased, and she found him in the barn, trying to split green wood with a half-dull axe. You're going to ruin your shoulder, she said, setting the kettle she'd brought on the hay bale. I'll ruin the axe first, he muttered, breath steaming. She handed him the tin of boiled coffee. You're stubborn. He took it, eyes meeting hers. You married me, didn't you? She pulled her coat tighter. I married the man who left warm stones in the cradle so Nolan wouldn't wake cold. Trenton leaned the axe against the post. You remember that? I remember everything that made me feel safe. She hesitated. Doesn't wear off easy. Don't want it to. I don't think it will. That night, Brielle wrote a letter by lamplight, her first since Kansas. She didn't sign it with just her name. She signed it as Brielle McAllister. When she stepped outside to let the ink dry, she found Trenton walking the fence line with a lantern, checking for breaks in the wire. She stood at the edge of the porch, watching the light bob along the drifted path, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, not hope. That had come and gone too many times to trust. It was something quieter, a kind of peace that didn't need proof. She went back inside, added a second quilt to the cradle, and placed the letter in the drawer beside the stove. It would wait until the road cleared. Until spring, maybe. She had time now. They both did. By the time the thaw reached the valley, the road into town had turned to mud thick enough to trap a wagon wheel. Trenton hitched the team and went in anyway, said they needed seed oats and a new barrel of lamp oil. Brielle stayed behind, splitting her time between the garden beds and the cradle, which now sat near the window, where Nolan could watch the birds hop through the budding grass. The boy had taken to crawling with the determination of someone twice his size. He'd started pulling himself upright on the edge of the table legs, teeth coming in slow and painful. Brielle rubbed clove tincture on his gums and sang to him low while she kneaded dough or fetched water from the well. When Trenton returned, his boots were caked in red clay and his hat brim was bent from the wind. He set a parcel on the table and pulled off his coat. "Town's waking up," he said. "Folks are planting early this year. Claire asked after you." Brielle opened the parcel. Inside was a small bound book, blank pages, leather cover, the kind used for keeping accounts or writing letters. "She said you might want a place to set your thoughts," Trenton added. "Said you've earned your own stories." Brielle turned the book in her hands. "I never learned much past the reading. Writing came slow. Doesn't have to be fast," he said. "Just true." She ran a hand over the cover, then tucked it beside the jar of dried beans on the shelf. That night, after Nolan finally settled, she sat with the book open in her lap. The pen Trenton brought was rough-tipped, but it held ink well enough. She wrote a single line, then stopped, staring at the page for a long while. "You ever feel like you're still catching up to yourself?" she asked. Trenton looked up from the kindling he was bundling. "Most days. I keep waiting to feel like I've arrived, like I'm not just borrowing this life." He stood and crossed to her, kneeling beside the chair. "You planted roots when you stayed," he said. "Whether you meant to or not," she met his eyes. "And you, I built this place for someone who never came, then you did." He didn't lean in. He simply waited, his hand on the arm of the chair, close but not pressing. Brielle reached for him, fingers slipping into his. "I want to build something with you," she said, "not just stay." "I want to belong. You already do." They married again that spring, no preacher this time, just the two of them beneath the cottonwood that shaded the eastern pasture. Trenton carved their initials into the bark, and Brielle laughed when he stepped back, wiping the knife on his trousers. "That's crooked," she said, pointing. "Then it'll match the fence I built behind the smokehouse." During the summer, they built a pen for chickens and added a second cradle, though the baby hadn't come yet. Brielle worked in the mornings while Trenton tended the herd, and in the evenings, they sat on the porch with Nolan between them, his head leaning on Trenton's knee as he dozed. One evening in late August, she brought out a bowl of cooled stew and sat beside him, watching the sun dip behind the ridgeline. "You remember that night I found you by the barn?" he asked. "I remember thinking you'd send me away. I remember thinking I couldn't let you go." Brielle took his hand, her thumb brushing the scar near his knuckle. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You gave me a life I didn't know I was allowed to want." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You gave me purpose. I didn't know how much I needed that." She pressed her lips to his. There was no urgency in it, just belonging, the kind that settled deep like water finding its level. When the second baby came, it was a girl. Brielle named her Eliza after her mother, and Trenton carved a new cradle by hand, sanding it smooth over the course of weeks without ever saying much about it. Claire came out to help with the birth, bringing dried herbs and a sharp tongue and staying just long enough to see the baby latch. "You've got a full house now," she said, glancing over the tidy room, the two cradles, the shelves lined with jars and cloth-wrapped loaves. Brielle wiped her hands on her apron. "It's more than I ever dreamed. You dreamed it." "Don't act like you didn't." When Claire left, Brielle stood in the doorway for a long while, watching the dust trail fade toward the horizon. That evening, Trenton held Eliza while Nalin clambered onto his shoulders, giggling until he hiccuped. Brielle leaned in the doorway, arms folded, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with the quiet certainty of being loved. "I used to think peace was something that came after," she said. "After the running, after the fear. But it's not like that." Trenton looked up from the baby. "What is it then? It's here, in the middle of everything, while the bread rises, while the floor creaks, while the children laugh." He crossed to her, Eliza nestled against his chest, Nalin still wrapped around his neck. "You made this peace," he said. "With your hands and your heart." She rested her forehead against his. "No," she whispered, "we made it together." And they did. They raised their children on the land that had once stood quiet and waiting. Nalin grew tall and strong, learned to ride bareback by the time he was 8, and Eliza had her father's stillness, her mother's fire. They never went hungry. They never had to run. And every night when the sun dipped behind the hills, Brielle and Trenton stood side by side on the porch, their hands entwined, watching the sky darken over the home they'd built not from luck or chance, but from choice. They grew old there, the two of them, weathered like the cottonwood, rooted like the fence posts driven deep in the thawed earth. And through every season, every birth and harvest and snowfall, they remained what they had always been since that first night, safe. Together. And deeply, quietly in love.